believe it's imminent. All the allies are in position except one, namely Turkey. There's a debate about when this battle occurs in the prophetic scenario, and we might take a look at that. And by the way, the Intelligence Digest, which has scooped the CIA twice in its 60-year history, says the Kremlin's made the decision. It's a question of positioning. That's kind of interesting. This is a secular intelligence source. If you've done your homework and you know about the 70th week of Daniel, you know that there's a 7-year period during which a covenant is enforced by a coming world leader who's going to violate that in the middle of that by this strange event called the Abomination of Desolation. Jesus himself labels the last half of that 7-year period, the last 3.5 years. He's the one that labels it the Great Tribulation. Now, most of you know that course, we know the temple is standing by the middle of that 7-year period because it's what's being desecrated. We don't know when it's going to be built. It could be built before the 7-year period starts. It might be built in the first half. We don't know. But we know it's standing by the middle of that week. And of course, that 7-year period is climaxed with the famed Battle of Armageddon, in which, of course, Jesus Christ is his second coming, sets up his kingdom, and so forth. The question is, where does MAGOG fit in? Hal Lindsey and other good scholars present the traditional view that the MAGOG invasion is part of the Armageddon scenario. And if he was here tonight, he would defend that view. Hal and I are good friends. This is the only place I can think of where we have a difference of view, and we've agreed to disagree agreeably. And Hal would defend that, and he may turn out to be right. But there are a number of us that feel, for some technical reasons, that the Ezekiel 38 thing actually happens prior to the 70th week. And I won't get into those technicalities. That's not our purpose here tonight, except to make this one point. What all of us agree, Grant Jeffries, Chuck Missler, Chuck Smith, I could list a bunch that hold the view I'm mentioning. There's an equal bunch of guys that have the traditional view, so we all kid around about it. But the real point is what we all agree on is that occurs after the rapture of the church. So that puts us in a very strange position, because if the MAGOG invasion is on our horizon, the rapture is even sooner. The way I usually express it to an audience, if you're driving down the streets of Yakima and the stores are decorating for Christmas, you know that Thanksgiving is not far away. Okay? But there is a verse in chapter 39 that the experts worry about. Speaking of this, when you get to this verse, God has already talked about the hailstones of fire. They're going to fall upon MAGOG and his invading forces. He says, I will send fire on MAGOG and among them that dwell carelessly in the isles or coastlands. What's that all about? Nobody knows. But it is suggestive that God's judgment falls on MAGOG and apparently also on a group, unidentified, that dwell carelessly in the remote coastlands or isles. We have no idea what that means. There is a conjecture. Maybe the hailstones of fire that fall on MAGOG are U.S. missiles. And maybe the U.S. is taking a hit in return. In other words, some scholars conjecture, just a speculation, that this may hint at a thermonuclear exchange. And that is sometimes pointed to as one of the reasons the U.S. is not a major player in end-time prophecy. As you study prophecy, one of the disturbing things, it isn't disturbing if you're in Europe or someplace else, but if you're American, you tend to feel very uncomfortable because America isn't clearly, we'll talk about that too before we go too far. Well, here it is right here. We are conspicuous in our absence of mention. What are the speculations? Well, maybe we're aligned with one of the other conspicuous players, Northern Europe. Maybe we're aligned with MAGOG. Maybe we're aligned with China. Most of us wouldn't really relate to. The European Confederacy, MAGOG, are we an ally of MAGOG? Unidentified, don't think so. The other conjecture is that maybe by then, for whatever reasons, we have economically deteriorated and we have been relegated to some irrelevancy. That's another conjecture that some scholars try to defend. Maybe there's a thermonuclear exchange of the type I've just showed you from verse 6 of chapter 39. There is another possibility that I'll acquaint you with before we're over, and that's the possibility of electromagnetic pulse attack. That may be something you're familiar with, maybe not. We'll talk about it briefly. But we do know from lots of other considerations that the 70th week of Daniel is not far away. It could be within a decade or two. It's not. Everybody has their opinions. But anyway, we have, as I say, a lot of these different trends. Let's shift to one that I usually start with, but I left here for a number of reasons. Let's talk a little bit about weapons of mass destruction. It's in the news a great deal. Many people are sensitive to that term today. Jesus made a remark in Matthew 24, speaking of the end times. He said, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Now, if we were studying this, say, during the Civil War, we find it hard to relate to this, because you and I cannot imagine the world wiping itself out with muskets and bayonets. So, see, implicit in this thing is in a technology statement. There are now over 30,000 nuclear warheads in inventory on the planet Earth. And only a few of those could plunge us into nuclear winter. The Russians have made several, the nominal warhead today is from 1 to 4 megatons. The Russians have made 25 megaton warheads. Those are too big to be useful. You take a handful of those and detonate them at the same time, you alter the orbit of the Earth. In other words, our weapon capability goes vastly beyond any conceivable application of it. But the real scary part is that this economy of scale in terror is no longer limited to major governments. They can fall in the hands of terrorists, rogue groups, unaccountable, deniable groups, and that's putting in a whole different complexion in warfare. It's a major threat confronting America, according to Dick Cheney. It's one of the most important problems we face today. This is not classified, it's in the news, if people notice. This is one of the most serious things. The nuclear cloud hangs over every major geopolitical decision on the planet Earth. What about delivery? Well, there are, incidentally, over 40 companies manufacturing nuclear weapons today, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. There are 27 countries presently developing advanced ballistic missiles to deliver these things. There are over 66 countries that have the technology to field a surface skimming cruise missile. Any country that can build a jet aircraft can build a cruise missile. General Alexander Lebed, a very popular Russian general, he passed away a couple of years ago, but when he was in the United States, on national television, he admitted that they had built 132 suitcase nukes, and 84 of these are missing from inventory. They're embarrassed. They have no idea where they are. He presumes some of them are probably in the hands of terrorists. The good news is they've expired. If you read Ezekiel very carefully, you'll discover something that used to be classified. The shelf life of a nuclear warhead is about 7 years.